There's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Do you know where that came from? Babylon base. So traces of Babylon are culturally imprinted here in Norway.
John Lennox explains the book of Daniel, and it's absolutely amazing. I think it gives us amazing evidence for God. So let's get right into it. Shout out to John Lennox, and here we go.
Look, you cannot possibly believe this stuff. Because the central claim of Christianity to start with, that God became human, that is supernatural. And the supernatural doesn't happen. And this book of Daniel, he claims to predict the future. Don't be ridiculous. This is not possible. No one can know history in advance. Well, we shall see. It's good to anchor things in history. And this is the way they wrote newspapers and records in the ancient world. They wrote these cylinders. And these are the Babylonian chronicles in the British Museum. And this one mentions the capture of Jerusalem in 507 BC. So we've actual historically inscribed cuneiform texts. Cuneos means a wedge. Cuneiform texts recording the events that are in Daniel. These are independent verifications of what is going on. So we've got a little bit of idea of the history, a little bit idea of the culture. And I ought to say, of course, that most of us are wearing watches of some kind or other. Do you ever notice that there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour? Do you know where that came from? Babylon.
No way.
They were brilliant mathematicians. How they worked in their cuneiform script, I don't know. But their mathematical texts are absolutely fascinating. And they'd worked out that the number 60 was highly divisible by whole numbers. So they used it as a base. So traces of Babylon are culturally imprinted here in Norway.
I did not know that.
What about their worldview? What did they think about ultimate reality? This is one of the most important questions. Because you see, contrary to many atheist ideas, every one of us has a worldview. We have a set of answers to the big questions. You have a worldview, for many of you it's Christian. Dawkins has a worldview, which is naturalism. And the Babylonians had a worldview. And they had ideas of creation. It proceeded through sexual union of the gods. But now here's the interesting thing. They had a theogony as well as a cosmogony. Now what does that mean? A cosmogony is the genesis of the universe. We believing Christians have a cosmogony. It's called Genesis 1. But they had a theogony, and that means, how did the gods originate? Because they believed that the gods originated from somewhere. They were not always there. And what they thought was this. In the beginning, there was primeval matter. And all else, the world and so on, and the gods, arose from this original matter. And you say, but this is very remote as an idea from the ancient world. But just a minute. What they did effectively was to make gods out of the forces of nature. And here I see a huge similarity to today.
Yep.
I know physicists.
It's so funny because atheists or people, materialists, are super close to the Babylonians. They only believed in things that came from matter, things that came from this world. And in the Christian religion, the God of the Bible is the exact opposite. The God we believe in is outside of space, time, and matter, and he created time and a beginning. And
effectively, they believe that the four fundamental forces of nature, strong and weak, gravitational force, strong and weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism, those forces determine everything. They don't call them gods, but they might as well, because they'll get you in the end. Gravity will get a lot of us in the end, unfortunately. And many thinkers like Paul Davies, the physicist, He looks at the universe and he sees great evidence of intelligence and design. And you think he's going to become a believer in God. Oh no, he says, this is superhuman intelligence. It's not supernatural. It has evolved in exactly the same way as our intelligence. Now, apart from the different language, there's hardly any difference at all between many atheists today and the ancient Babylonians. In other words, Daniel and his friends were pushed into an essentially materialistic worldview. Do you notice where the gods came from? They came from the matter of the universe. They are material gods. And so we can learn a great deal in how they dealt with them.
That's crazy.
And of course, these days, what happens is no one can avoid the question of creation. They get rid of a transcendent creator, God, and then they say matter is capable of creation. You've got to have something to do the creation. But even more so, they claim that nothing is the creator, that the whole universe created itself out of nothing. And at this point, I'm tempted to give you a lecture on nothing. But I'm not going to. Because I've written a book about nothing. It's really called God and Stephen Hawking, but it investigates this idea. Do you know, in our culture today, the basic choice that you have to make is between God as creator and nothing as creator.
Wow.
It's one of the reasons the biblical worldview makes so much sense to me. So there are parallels. But now, let's look quickly at the whole book. The trouble with talks like this is that we don't get very far. And I know you're intelligent young people. And one of the things that has fascinated me since boyhood is the way in which some literature is organized at the structure level. And Daniel is a brilliant example of it. So I want us to look at what the book is like as a book. Well, first of all, some of it is chronological. But unfortunately, the revelations of chapter 7 and 8 occur before what is said in chapter 6, so the whole book is not chronological. Secondly, it's not neatly divided into prophecy and narrative. There's narrative in chapter 1, there's prophecy in chapter 2, there's narrative in chapters 3, 4, and 5, and then there's some prophecy, etc., etc. So that's not neat either. So the important thing is to look at its literary structure. Now, this might be a slightly new idea to you. So I'm going to give you the fastest run through Daniel you've ever seen in your lives.
Go.
So fasten your seatbelts and let's go. Here is a table of contents of the book of Daniel. First of all, the story in the university where he refused the king's food. Do you remember that? Secondly, in chapter 2, there's the story of Nebuchadnezzar's terrifying dream of a great image that came crashing down when a stone hit it. And thirdly, Nebuchadnezzar himself built a golden image. The dream had gone to his head. So he built a golden image, and he asked people, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to bow to it, and they refused. And then in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, and it's about him again, got very proud. And he was walking on the roof of Babylon, and he said, "Isn't this great Babylon that I built for my glory and my majesty?" And in that moment, he was cut down.
Wow. Exactly
In fulfillment of a dream of a tree he'd had that was cut down. And he behaved like an animal, and he ate the grass, and his hair grew long, and his nails grew long for 7 years.
I absolutely love how he's explaining this. And it's just so crazy. Even just to think about King Nebuchadnezzar, how he became like an animal for 7 years. And then he got restored into the kingdom again, just like that. And then eventually he got overthrown, but
God restored him.
yeah.
But in the next chapter 5, there's another king, Belshazzar. And he made a mockery of God. And he was mocking God at his banquet, Belshazzar's feast, where he brought the vessels from the temple of God and put them on his table. And a hand came out and wrote on the wall. And that night he was killed. And the empire of Babylon fell. Why that happened, we shall see. So there are 5 stories, one after the other, and they come to a huge climax at Belshazzar's feast and the end of the reign of the Babylonians. Now be careful here. Babylon remained the capital city as we move into chapter 6, because now the governing empire is Medo-Persia, but it's the same capital city. So we have a change of empire. It's like, in a way, Hong Kong was ruled by the British for a while, and now it's gone back to the Chinese. It's the same place, but different rulers. That's what happened here. Incidentally, Daniel is the only person in history of any kind who's ever run 2 empires. How do you rise to the top of 2 empires and not only maintain your faith in God, but maintain your witness to God? Well, we shall see.
Yeah.
So let's now look at what happens next. This is the story of Daniel refusing to pray to the king, and he's put in the lion's den, and he's released. Then in chapters 7 and 8, we've 2 visions. A vision of 4 animals, and then a vision of 2 animals. In chapter 9, Daniel is studying scripture, and he realizes it's about to be fulfilled, and he prays to God, what's going to happen to my home city of Jerusalem? And God tells him there's going to be a long history before Jerusalem is restored. And then the final 3 chapters are obviously one section, and they lead down into the Greek Empire and ultimately become a prediction, I believe, of the time of the end. Well, that's a fast run through Daniel, isn't it?
Yep.
Now think of it, there are 10 segments to the book. Do they make any sense? Yes, they do. Because you start with an administrative story in Babylon. You then follow with 2 images, one a dream image, one a real image. Then you have 2 kings disciplined. One is disciplined and restored, one is disciplined and not restored. Then you start up again. You have administration in Medo-Persia. And then you have 2 visions of animals. And then you have 2 writings explained. The first one is the Bible, and the second one is what Daniel calls the writing of truth. So you can look at them side by side. This is the kind of structure that appears in secular classical literature sometimes.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. How fascinating and how advanced they were in their literal structures and writings. That's crazy.
It appears in very highly and uniquely developed form in our Bible, and not only in Daniel. And what got me going on this was my friend and mentor, Professor David Gooding, whom some of you in Norway know, who discovered this in Daniel many years ago and wrote a monograph about it for Tyndale Press. Now you notice that there are similarities in the structure, and the first half of the book is the end of Babylonian supremacy. The second half of the book is the time of the end. So it's talking about the far distant future.
Wow.
So it's fascinating. We have a mixture of personal story, of history, of prophecy.
Wow.
And we have a projection of things into the future. Is it really credible or not? So now we're going to have a look at some detail, in case you're fed up with generalities. So we're going to have a...
Before he finishes, it's just so amazing to see like the correlations between Daniel in that time and the time we're living in today.
Little detail. So let me read from the beginning of Daniel 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, who seems to have been the dean of students, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, just like at Oxford and Cambridge, which is probably where they got it from. They were to be educated for 3 years. At the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. I very much hope you have. So let's have a look at the first major thing in Daniel's life. It starts seemingly innocently. Nebuchadnezzar came in a certain year, but then it says this, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. What? Come on.
What?
If it had been the other way round, and it said the Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar, who was a very powerful monarch with all the latest weapons and a vast army, into the hand of Jehoiakim, who was a very weak king, that would have been very impressive, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But listen, any contemporary historian, and I've talked to them, would say what happened is a typical example of Darwinism in history. You've got a vast, great nation, you've got a tiny little nation standing in the way, and they just roll over them and wipe them out. So what's this then? The Lord gave. Why risk looking a fool by saying the Lord's behind it? It's
true.
very striking to me. And it's telling us a great deal about Daniel. Here is the first source of this, at that time, young man, his confidence. He passionately believed that there's a God in control of history. Do you? Now listen, there are
Wow. That's amazing. Definitely go check the rest out. It's super, super interesting. Shout out to John Lennox. And yeah, there's so many things that we can learn from the Bible and trust that God is real and that he has a plan and he's in control over everything. So guys, I encourage you all to go to Jesus today. Know that he loves you and he's longing to have a relationship with you. So put him first. It will be the best decision you guys could ever make.